So welcome everybody. Welcome to this webinar today. And it's on what I believe is a critical topic and a very topic that's very close to my heart. So we're talking today about how do we create value and how do we create substance to our businesses, and particularly as it pertains to our industry, which is the built environment professional services. And the reason why we care so much about this at Fresh Projects is that we're so passionate about creating a sustainable, financially sustainable business and industry. And we want to see an industry where we're lucrative, where we're not just surviving, where we're actually making fantastic profits, and we're able to create real businesses that are worth a lot. And the result of that is that we can attract and retain the best talent, and that we have the smartest minds coming to work with us, and we'll get to carry on working on the best projects that we love doing. And that's something that, like I say, at Fresh Projects, we're passionate about, and that's why we created Fresh Projects, and that's why we're trying to help lift up the industry. So this today is very tied in with that. So just before I hand over to Tim, I just want to recount two stories from my personal past that I think are relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. So I used to work at WSP, which today is now a 50-odd thousand people business across the globe. But it started off as 4 people in 1969 joining together to start a consultancy. And the way that WSP grew over the years was not organically, but through acquisition. So they bought companies and bought companies and bought companies, and they got to where they are today. In fact, I think they first entered into South Africa in the early 2000s and bought Webs, Watson Edwards van der Spey, which was where I was working at the time. And we got to a point, say 10 years ago, where we had on our balance sheet this line item called goodwill, and that represented all the businesses that we'd bought just in South Africa. So there'd been many of them, and it was many hundreds of millions, that line item. And we looked at it and we said, what does this number truly represent? So we bought these businesses, we'd paid this money, we'd got this asset, it was sitting on our balance sheet. But the people who had joined with that business had subsequently left. The projects that they came with had been finished. So what was that number actually representing? What was the true value of those businesses? And we actually had to end up writing down that number, and it resulted in massive losses through the P&L and had to be reported up through the stock exchange in Canada or wherever it was. So it was an interesting awakening for me to understand, like, when you're buying this business and you put it on your balance sheet, what are you actually getting for that money? And then the second example is just from the other side of the fence, which is the acquiree. So we had a similar situation a bit later, where one of our senior mechanical engineer directors left to start his own business. And we had this big hole in terms of skills in the business. So we went out and again, we acquired another business. And the business we acquired, it was a very well-known business. It was about 20-odd people. And they'd been doing a lot of cutting-edge projects and well-known in the industry, like I said. But the owner who'd started the business, and his name was actually on the business, had got ill. He was in his 60s and he could no longer work. And his wife wasn't interested in taking over the business or running it. The engineers that were working for him, they wanted to do engineering. They didn't want the liability and responsibility of running this business. And we actually ended up buying that business from my side for what I thought was hugely undervalued relative to what it was. But the end result, so the wife and the husband who can no longer work didn't really get anything out of that business, just because no one else wanted to, take that business and run with it. So those two examples, I think, set the stage nicely for what we're going to be talking about today. So to understand whether you're building a craft or an enterprise, and what the impact of each of those are, and what is the value that you're going to get out of that. And we're going to look, I believe, at the end at some examples of actually how do you value your business. So that's enough from me. So if I can just now hand over to Tim. Over to you, Tim.
Great, thank you. So he said, yes, the main topic today is to sort of draw that picture. So thank you for those examples. They're excellent. And I'll be closing with a couple of examples very similar to those where we go through some of the maths as well. So you can see in real terms what difference it can make to you as an individual if you've set up a business that's a craft or enterprise. So just very, very briefly, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm guessing that most of you on this call don't know me, my name is Tim Holmes. I'm one of the senior partners of Sirdar Group, and our business is to help train directors, to help find and appoint non-executive directors, and to guide boards on an ongoing journey. I'm originally from the UK, hence the funny mixed up accent, and have been in South Africa since '92 and been with Sirdar since 2013, and have been mostly focused on serving on boards, running training programs, and doing a few consulting work and that kind of thing for any boards that need some help. So what I wanted to find out was a little bit about who's in the room, and really to sort of get some understanding of the size of the business that you are working with or that you are the shareholder in. So maybe please just tick whichever one of those applies. So if you're less than 10, you've got 10 to 50 or more than 50 employees, and this is full-time, just because I know a lot of consulting businesses have massive fluctuation in terms of contractors on particular jobs, etc. So to get a size of what is the main full-time team, what does that look like? We've got 3 more people, just please tick the boxes. Cool. Just give it 10 more seconds. Great, so it looks like we've got quite a good spread. I'm just going to end that. So we've got, yep, equal numbers of less than 10 and 10 to 50. So that's great, because those sort of size businesses are typically the ones that we're talking about when we talk about craft and that move from craft to enterprise. And we got one which is 50 plus, so fantastic. I'm hoping this is going to be helpful in understanding how the enterprise should look. So let's just move that out of the way so I can see my screen. Cool. So what I'd also want you to do, please, is put down whatever your biggest question is about this whole concept of craft versus enterprise. Put it in the Q&A, put it in the chat, whichever you feel most comfortable. Claire will be managing those 2 boxes, so we'll cover those questions at the end. Claire, if there's anything that's specifically relevant to what I'm talking about at that moment, then please pause and we can answer that question at the time, because it may be more difficult to remember what the context was when we get to the end.
Sure thing.
Otherwise, we'll do the questions at the end, and we'll allow at least 10-15 minutes to go through that. So what I really want to talk about is this whole concept: are you building a craft business or an enterprise business? And this is a moment in time, we are making a decision kind of thing, which I'll touch on in various aspects during this webinar. And more importantly, which one is better for you financially? Because they are both can be highly profitable, they both can generate massive personal wealth, but it's a different way of getting there. And one may or may not be a better fit for the way you operate as an individual and the type of business you're in. Because I noticed Simon gratefully sent me a link today about architectural consultancies, which typically don't have a particularly high sale value, whereas other engineering companies and construction consultings and big architectural firms may have. So what is the right fit for you is important to understand, so that when you're thinking about the legacy, the thinking of what you're going to get out of the business at the end when you retire, that you've planned for that starting now, not when you get to retirement or when you get to exit. So we talk about what game are you playing, because it's important to understand which of these 2 you're playing, what the difference is between a craft versus enterprise, and then I'll go through some choices. So what I mean by what game are you playing? In sports, there's a fundamental difference between a sport that was reliant on 1 or 2 individuals and a sport's reliant on the team. And that talks to what we're talking about here with craft versus enterprise. So just think about your favorite sport, whether it's tennis that we've just finished Wimbledon, or whether it's rugby, and there frankly hasn't been much in the way of rugby on TV recently with all of the COVID restrictions. So thinking about those sports, if the individual tennis player can't play, then their earning capacity, their ability to win tournaments stops at that point in time. Meanwhile, a rugby team brings in a substitute during the match or substitutes someone out afterwards, but the game doesn't stop because 1 or 2 individuals can't play in that particular game or match or as part of the rest of the season. So it's the same kind of concept that we're trying to get across when we think about business. Are we playing a sport where it's very much about the individual? Or is it a sport or a business which is very much more about the team? So craft versus enterprise. My clicker's not working. I'll have to go back to keyboard. Craft versus enterprise. So there's different types of crafts. And typically when we think of a craft, we tend to think of it being a craftsman, a craftswoman, and it's very much an individual who's highly skilled in what they do. And that might be a carpenter, it might be a plumber, it might be some kind of trade, so artisan. Then we move to a little bit more sort of micro enterprise or a specialist kind of enterprise. So this might be where you start to get to the point where you've done the professional degree and you've become a doctor. Now you open a surgery with yourself and an assistant or receptionist, or an architectural firm, same, where you are the consultant and you maybe have one or two people that help you. Or it could be any of those kind of businesses, but it's very much about the individual. And then you start to build and maybe join forces with multiple individuals, and you start to become more of a small medium enterprise. This is a little bit more like a business, but the concept hasn't changed. All that's happened is you've got more craftspeople in this team than you had before. And the problem with that is it's very much about the individual. So it's down to your own knowledge, what you're bringing to the table, how you utilize that knowledge, how do you best provide your craft, your service to the wider world, and then sharing your knowledge with your own team. So there's a tendency when we start a craft business, even if it's just the one of us, we said, right, we've got this skill and ability, we're going to go to market now. Typically, the next person we appoint is not someone that's the same or better than us at our craft. We typically appoint someone who's training up, and they're going to help and support us, and we're going to train them up over time. Because the problem typically is that when you have someone who's got to the level where they have become a master craftsman themselves, they tend to go off and start up their own practice. So the craft is really about owning a job. And that's, I know, difficult to absorb because we think we're building a business. But at the end of the day, without that craftsman there is no business, because they are the business. So in fact, you are paying yourself a salary out of that business. You're not building an asset. So it's important to understand that craft is not right or wrong. It's just a different game. So if you're playing tennis, you become wealthy in one way. If you're playing rugby, you become wealthy in another way. The sport's different. So it's what you do with that income. So in a craft, it tends to be earning as much as you can per hour by being the best you can be, being in demand by being the best you can be, and letting everyone else in the market or the world or the country know that you are the best so that people come to you. But take those earnings and put them somewhere else. Don't put them into the business, because the business has very little value at the end of the day. So it's about taking that revenue, thinking of it as a salary, and then paying it to yourself so that you put it into a property portfolio, or you start building a share portfolio, or whatever it is that you would do as an individual in terms of saving for your retirement. So it's focusing, as I said, on the number of hours we work, the rate we get per hour, and then building a team that can support us to do as much of that as we possibly can, which is very different from an enterprise, because an enterprise is an asset. An enterprise has value in and of itself because it's run by a team. So it tends to be a larger organization, because if you have a team, you tend to have more people in the organization. And the critical differentiator between starting a craft and starting an enterprise is, if you're starting with an enterprise mindset, the first person you should employ is someone who's better at doing something than you are, so that you can focus on doing what you do best and what only you can contribute. So it could be you're really good at sales, so then you bring in a phenomenal technician to do the technical, or you are phenomenal technical, but you're not very good at sales. Then bring in an absolutely amazing salesperson as a partner or as an employee, whichever makes sense. But it's building the team so that you can focus more and more and more on rising above the organization and growing yourself. So you're growing yourself in terms of leadership skills, management skills, understanding of the broader industry, not growing yourself in a particular skill set, which is what would typically happen in the craft kind of concept. So you're building out this organization. So if it's starting as one architect, it's starting to think about how do I team up with other architects so we can share costs, we can share ideas. We then employ someone who can do the admin for the group of us. But we have a concept of how do we almost franchise this thing? How do we build it where it's based on a system so that ultimately we have less and less reliance on very specific individuals? And coming back to Simon's point, that might be buying other groups of people to bring the people in, or it could be that we just become more and more much better at building a business and not just building a particular skill and ability. So is there any questions on that point before I move on?
Maybe one that came through from Yanda van der Walt is just what is an optimal size for a business? And I think it kind of, you've talked about that exactly now, is that it depends on what type of business you're building. And yeah, exactly.
So craft, I mean, good point actually, because it reminds me of a piece of the history of craft. Craft comes from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, where it was literally a master craftsman did a job. They were the master baker, they were stonemasons, they were whatever they were, and they appointed apprentices to come in and train up and help and support them, and then maybe have a lackey who swept the floor and cleaned up at the end of the day. And typically those craft businesses were probably 5, max 10 people. And if we look at what's happened over time, the businesses, we have hundreds, if not thousands of businesses in South Africa and the rest of the world that really struggle to break past that 5 to 10 employees, because the mindset is a craft mindset. It's all about an individual, which means that the business has very small amount of room to grow, because it's entirely limited by how far the founder will let the business grow. And if it starts outgrowing them as an individual, there's a tendency that will push it down again, because it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's challenging, and I don't know what to do next. So it's all of those kind of questions that come to play. And that's when you're feeling that change. When you're in that stress, it's too much. I can't do it. I can't keep up. The work's becoming more and more and more, and I'm stressed out and I'm working too many hours. Listen to that and feel that, because that's when you need to grow. That's when you need to change. So if you want to continue to do the craft, it's how do I refine that craft? How do I make my time more efficient? How do I turn away clients that actually really aren't profitable? Or I need to build a team, and they need to take away all this stuff that I'm not very good at and bring in experts at the stuff that I know I'm not very good at, so that we can grow and we can expand because we have room to do it. Claire, you want to ask me?
This might lead into it. So one of the questions, and I think it's Taryn, second Ben. So if you look at craft, how do you value a business? And how do you value that goodwill when it sits with the current owner, when the current owner then leaves? So I guess it's that thing that you're talking about, to say, well, look, while you're there and you are the craft owner and it all sits with you, get your money out and invest somewhere else. But when it comes to the point of selling that business, how is it valued?
Usually there's some kind of profit multiple that people apply in particular industries. So some industries have very specific rules that it's 5 times whatever your book looks like, or whatever your order book looks like, or but it's very subjective. So if you've got 100 clients, well, are they clients today? Will they be clients tomorrow? They're only clients because of the current person who's running the business. So usually a business broker will ask those kind of questions and maybe dig in and speak to some of those people to find out, is it a relationship that they are holding on to, or is it the service of this team that's behind them? But that's the point. If you're going to an individual because they are the best at what they do, then what happens if the individual's not there? Actually, the business has no value other than the equipment or the debtor's book or the cash in the bank, because there is nothing else. There's no one else who's doing the business, who's doing the work, who's generating the revenue. So that's really what it comes down to. What is left in terms of revenue generation capacity if you take that founder or the person who's selling the business out? Whereas with a team, there's always systems, there's stuff that can be used to continue to run the operation, whether those individuals are there or not, because it's become part of the engine of the business. It's not the decision and the thinking and the skill of an individual.
So just to jump in and kind of reiterate what you're saying a little bit earlier about these multitude of micro enterprises in generally, but this is very specific to our industry as well. So if you look at the data and the statistics, in the UK, for example, 90% of all architectural firms have less than 10 people working for them. In the UK, 80% of all engineering firms have less than 10 people working for them. And in South Africa, the same, similar data there. So that glass ceiling you talk about with that craft workmanship very much exists in our particular industry. And I think that's why this discussion today is so critical.
Yeah, at the end, I've got an example that I took straight from a Google search of businesses for sale, just to see what those values look like. And it's amazing how few businesses I could find that were worth more than 2 million rand, because so many of them are founder-led. So yeah, we'll go through that example at the end. So first principle is an enterprise must be able to operate without the immediate involvement of the founder on a day-to-day basis. That's always a good test. What happens when you go on holiday for 3 weeks? Could you go on holiday for 3 months? Could you go on holiday for a year and come back to a business that was actually worth more and is more profitable than the one you left behind? Very few, as you mentioned earlier, Simon, very few of the businesses with less than 10 employees can survive without the founder being there. And I often wonder if in South Africa, we didn't close so many businesses for 2 or 3 weeks over Christmas, when most business owners, because that's all they are, that's what they think of themselves as, how many would actually have a business or even be able to ever take a holiday? We'll talk about why I said it's in quotes owner, because you can't own a business, but I'll talk about that in a second.
So this might be premature, just let me know. But so Bradley's put down a question to say, you know, one of the key success factors of SME is the way of doing it. So the culture that you engage, your clients are attracted to you because of your culture, the way you do it, your key staff. So how do you scale up from there without losing that USP and keeping all those unique things that your customers came to you with, but still successfully build this enterprise model that you're talking about that could be worth something at the end of the day? And I think that's, I'm not sure if we can even answer that today, but it's a really, I think we talk about that glass ceiling. I think that's got a huge influence as to why you don't get bigger, because you start losing the special sauce that everybody comes to you for.
Yeah, and I think it comes to this second principle. It must have a known value because it must be able to continue to grow on its own, which is what you're talking about here. And that becomes a system thing. So if the business exists because it's got your name on the door, then you need to make sure that there's a system that's built that other people can learn so they can do what you do. Often we don't take the time to think about the way we do things and how we build that into the way the system does things and where the business does things, so that if we're not there, the business can continue. And that's that transition. As long as you are the best at doing what you do, then any client's going to want to speak to you. They're going to want you on the job. They're going to want you supervising the site because you are the best at doing it. So where is the system that does most of the work you do? And ideally, where is the other person that has been through a training program to do what you do? So now that you can trust, the client can trust that someone else can do it and someone else can do it. But it's not by chance. It's not accidental. And if I drop down dead tomorrow, here's the manual, here's the process, here's the videos, here's the everything we need to describe how we do things around here. So it comes from the strategy is we want to be a bigger business. How are we going to get there? The culture, what's the culture of the organization? Often that's driven by the individual, but have we actually ingrained it in the business? All of those kind of things are about building an enterprise system. You don't want to be corporate. You don't want to have some system that people don't care anymore. So that becomes part of the culture. So the culture around here is we care. And there are big organizations that have got that right. And people go to them because they get that experience, whoever answers the phone. They don't have to speak to Joe or Francois or whoever to get that experience. So it's absolutely about building a system, putting things into a way that can be trained, can be passed on, can be remembered, etc. And it's been interesting. We're going through that phase exactly at the moment because my partner and the founder of Sirdar is in New Zealand and has been for the last 6 months. So it's how do we run the business with him not physically being in the same country? So we're getting better at that. And now it's, well, have we documented everything? Because if we want to expand or bring new people in, have we sucked everything out of his head so that someone else can learn it before he disappears completely into wherever he ends up? So in summary, enterprise has nothing to do with you. So that's the transition. And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes thought, is how do I make sure this business does all the things I do well? And if you can't do that, then focus on being a craft and do the craft business thing really well. And that's about the expertise and the individual and caring and giving fantastic service. Then you need to think about 80-20 rule. Who are the most profitable clients that I can have? And where are they? And seek them out and give them the best service you possibly can. And if someone's not in that group, sorry, we're fully booked. I can only get to you in 6 months' time, or here's someone else I work with who can do the work. So it comes back to more hours if you want to do more hours, or a higher rate per hour. And if you can bring in various people to do some of the smaller jobs or to help you, support you, so you're only working on the really lucrative stuff, then that's how you build a bigger and a better craft business. But at the end of the day, it's understanding people are buying from me and I can't find a way of changing that. That's just the nature of the business I'm in. And let's work with that and let's do the best job we can. And there are examples of people who are massively wealthy running craft businesses. So it's not to say it's necessarily going to hold you back from a financial perspective, but it's a very different way of building a business rather than building it in the enterprise direction. The game rules are different. Anything else that's popped up, Claire?
Yeah, there's one more, actually two, sorry, I lie. It might be premature, but the one question was, how does, if a business is going to be handed over to the next generation, the kids are going to now take over the business, but they're unable to afford to buy the business from the folks at the time. Is there a way to deal with that?
We'll talk about that now, because that comes to the difference between shareholders, directors, and managers, and it gives you choices if you get that right. So if you're handing over a craft, then you're probably going to have to work out some kind of payout deal over a period of time or something like that. If you've set it up properly as an enterprise, then you have an opportunity to get paid a dividend, and the business continues for as long as the business continues, and you get your dividend for as long as you're a shareholder. It's a different income stream. So the handing over to a child, if you're running a craft business, is very much the problem that someone else would have if they bought the business from you. The only difference is that child has grown up with the business and potentially has a better understanding of how it works. But it's the same problem. You've got to get them up to the level that they are a master craftsperson so that they can continue. There isn't any other way of doing it. So start early and let them take over before you want to retire, so you can take a step back and and take a salary and then start thinking about shareholding so you get a dividend and no one's upset because that's the way it works, etc. Because there's nothing worse than a family business with dad with a salary line item and he hasn't been to the factory or been into the consulting business for the last 6 months. Why is it there? If he's a shareholder being paid a dividend, if the business makes a profit, different conversation.
And then there's one last one, which is about succession planning, and succession planning with the compliance of BBEEE. So that being the biggest issue. So how do you kind of approach, like you say, creating that longevity for the business with a succession plan that is BEE compliant?
Yeah, look, I think to get that right, then it really does come down to making sure it's an enterprise, because you have to have a team to do it properly. Otherwise, you've got to find someone who's as good as you, and that may or may not be possible. So it's a really tough and difficult position to be in a South African context. So we often end up with partners who can't do the job as well as we do, and then it becomes a grudge sale or grudge purchase. So it's really about building a team. And then if you're serving as a director, which I'll touch on now, that's a different level of engagement. And it doesn't require you to have huge amount of skill and ability in the specific business. You can add different value, other value in different ways. And that becomes easier to bring in someone at that level. So what we're talking about here is the law of 3 hats. And it's broken down into 3 main groupings. So the reason why they're the different shapes is because in a context of an enterprise, and even when it's the moment you register a PTY, actually, so even if you're running a business as a craft, but you register as a PTY, you've effectively got the building blocks, legal building blocks of an enterprise already there, but is not necessarily using them as part of your toolkit. So any business has to have at least one shareholder. Any business that's registered as anything other than a sole proprietor has to have at least one director. And then if you don't have any management, then really you don't have an operating business. The reason why I've chosen that shape for shareholders is as a business grows, typically you have some people who are in the business, some people not in the business, some people retired, some people might even be children, who are all shareholders. There could be someone who's not even related to you that's put some money into the business or bought a share in a business. The thing in common with shareholders is they have an expectation. They have an expectation of some kind of return on their investment. The board is made up of directors who are equals, which is why it's a circle. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And management, to run a business effectively, it typically always ends up as some kind of hierarchy, and you need someone who's in charge of the operations. So MD, CEO, whatever the title is you've given them. But it only really works if it's a hierarchy. And we see it in all kinds of institutions where typically you can only manage relationships with about 5 people effectively and mentor them and lead them. So you end up with a pyramid of 5s that become 5s. The reason why I've put solid line and dotted line between shareholders and board is as we start to get into the roles and responsibilities of each. Where it becomes really difficult when you are running with a craft concept is there is no distinction between shareholders, directors, and managers. They're all the same people. As you move into an enterprise, it gives you the opportunity to start thinking about these entities as separate, and gives you the opportunity to now think about bringing in other people at these different levels, because they add different value at different times into the way the business grows and how it expands and goes forward. So as you're transitioning out of a business, if you have the structure clearly defined and everybody understands them within your organization, you have a choice. I'm currently in management, but I'm also the majority shareholder and I'm a director. So which one do I want to do going forward? Well, actually, I really like tinkering in the engineering shop, and I quite like doing the lathe work or the CNC work or whatever it is. I want to carry on doing that. Cool. Okay, so what's the salary for that? Well, there you go. There's your salary. And I'm going to do that until I'm 70 or if the guys kick me out. I'm really good at the strategy of this organization. So it makes sense for me to stay on as a director. Now, it's difficult to manage the relationship with the existing other executives because they're going to think I'm going to dominate the conversation. So I'm going to bring in an independent chairman and possibly an independent director to balance out that board and make sure that we do the functions of the board effectively. But I can add value in the strategy context. So that's my role on the board. I'm not going to take another role like chairman. I'm going to bring in someone else who knows how to do that, who has the craft and expertise to do that. And then shareholders. Well, I've got my kids coming on track. I need to actually get them involved, but I've got estate planning I need to do. So do I put my shareholder into a trust and the kids get the benefit through the trust and all the dividends get paid to the trust? Or do I give them shareholding because that's actually makes more sense and it gives them more sort of direct buy-in and they want to be involved in the business and all of that kind of emotional engagement's different. So let's start working that out now. Or no, we're going to leave it later. But there's a plan around it, because the business is structured in such a way that every year it pays shareholders a dividend. There's a revenue flow that's coming through the business via profits to shareholders with their shareholder hat on. So you can start building, and second, third, fourth generation businesses, families sit at shareholder level. There may be none in the board or management if they are not qualified to be there. So the really successful businesses that have been going for hundreds of years typically find out as early as possible in a child's development whether they have the skills or the interest to be involved in the business and some kind of management operation level, where they have the skills and abilities and want to be involved at a strategic level. So different career path, they may have to go work out of their businesses outside and develop their skills as leaders and strategic thinkers, etc. Because ultimately we want them to serve on the board to give that family context. Or they may want to do something completely different, but they still get the benefit of that asset you've built over all these years because they are shareholders, because they get a share of the dividends. So it starts giving you choices. That's the biggest thing. And it gives you longevity and sustainability for the future, because as it comes down to, it's not reliant on individuals anymore. You're now working as different teams with very specific roles and responsibilities. And it's a hard line because shareholders should not be meddling in the organization at all if that's their only hat. They must determine what return they want in investment. Great, give a statement of intent, shareholders, this is what we want the company to give in dividends, expectations in capital growth, etc. But they shouldn't be walking the shop floor giving instructions. That's not the role of a shareholder. That's a role of management. The reason why there's the dotted line between board and management, because there's much more information that flows backwards and forwards between the two. But still, the board should not be messing with operations. Conversations in the board meetings should be, no, sorry, that's a shareholder discussion. You need to have that discussion as a shareholders meeting. Let's put it in the diary and make it happen. No, that's way too operational. It's far too much detail. Please present a paper on that. We can do it by round robin, but we want to know what the strategic conversation looks like. It's not whether we should buy a car for the salesman or not. It's a different story. So it's everybody starts operating in their specific place. And what confuses the hell out of it is everyone has a relationship from the company, but they're all different. So this is a selfish relationship. I'm expecting a return on my investment of time and money into the business. Board should be selfless relationship. It's actually instructed by law that we should not have any kind of personal conflicts. We must be doing everything in the best interest of the business. Getting complicated if you're wearing both these hats already. And then management has a contract, which is a negotiated discussion. It should be a value sharing discussion about how am I going to contribute to the business and how is the business going to contribute to me. And it becomes selfless and selfish depending on whether the relationship's working well or not. If it's, I love working for this business and I really enjoy my role, I'm going to be selfless in that moment. If you're not paying me enough and you didn't give me the bonus you promised me last year, I'm going to start to get really selfish. So that's why that arrow is a double-edged sword. It should be negotiated, but it also can go wrong badly quickly because there's that selfish element as well. So that's the overview of 3 hats. That's what you want to try to move towards if you want to build an enterprise. And you can start at any point in the journey to start thinking about which hat am I wearing at a particular point in time, and how do I start to separate them out? Even if it is the same 2 or 3 people in the organization that wear all 3 of them. Have we thought about what we want out of this business as shareholders? Have we thought about how we're valuing this thing? Have we got someone to get an accountant or a business broker to do a valuation for us so we can set the expectation? Are we having meetings where we only talk about strategy and make decisions that are strategic related? Where is that? When is that? Which room do we meet in? Which coffee shop do we go to for those meetings? How often do we have them? Are they in the diary? And then we've obviously got the operational day-to-day. But it's critical if you want to build a bigger business to start thinking about these 3 properly and understanding the difference between the different roles. And the last part is that, and I'm sure everyone's experienced this, particularly if you're wearing all these hats, day to day, the conversation just falls to operational discussions. We think we're having a board meeting, but actually all we've really spoken about was some kind of operational issue and whether the cleaner came in last Friday or not. When it gets heated, when there's a discussion that starts to become a bit fractious, the water starts to boil and steam starts to form and it rises to the highest common denominator. I'm the majority shareholder, therefore what I say goes. Happens all the time. So that's why it's doubly important to understand which hat we're wearing at a particular point in time, because it can start to impact the decisions you make and they can start to have a detrimental impact on the business going forward. So how are we doing for time? Need to wrap it up, I guess. So 3 hats: invest for return, champions the promise, and brings the promise to life. And there's no join between shareholder and manager in that diagram. So it's about making a choice. This is a T-junction decision. This is not a blended curve. This is, we either need to decide we are going to build the best possible craft we can, or we're going to build the best possible enterprise we can. It's impossible to do both. And that's typically why businesses get stuck at a particular level. They've sort of overcome some of the challenges of not having made the decision, but it's only going to catch them next level. So there's 10 employees, it happens, 50 employees, it happens. We've got companies that are being run like a craft with 100 employees. But as soon as you take the founder out when they're sick with COVID for 3 months, you suddenly realize, okay, this is a craft. As soon as the father dies and has to hand over everything and everything gets handed over to the son, they haven't quite caught up with everything that was going on in dad's head. Oh, okay, this business has been structured by craft. We've been lucky to have got this far. So it's really important, wherever you are in your life cycle of your business, to just make the choice. So am I going to climb solo with a small team, or am I going to climb as a team? And that's really as simple as it gets, but it's really, really, really difficult to make the change. And the last part is just in terms of language, we say this is my business. This is my car, assets, desk, whatever. If we are truly to build a bigger business, we need to start thinking about it as being its own, it's a juristic person, and you can't own a human being. The business owns those assets. So treat them as business assets, not ours, regardless of how many shares we have. They're not ours. We have the right to return our investment, as I said before, and we have the right to choose who the directors are leading the business. But we don't have a right to access all of their assets. That's not part of the deal. So I'll just quickly move on to this bit, which was the numbers we talked about earlier. So thank you for sharing this, Claire. I think it was on the original blurb. And it's very true that the profit per practice rises, but not necessarily the profit per person. So some of the most profitable businesses per person are craft businesses, because they can be highly profitable in terms of markup and net profit, etc. But they've only got a small number of people. So everybody potentially has the benefit of getting a high salary or getting a dividend or whatever it might be. As soon as you grow the business, the overall numbers grow, but then you also start getting a massive difference between the lowest paid and the highest paid. So that's always the danger. So what I took was two examples. One was I looked for smaller businesses, and this one popped up. That's not the picture of the business. I was just trying to find something that made sense, that was similar to what this business might look like in reality. One owner, 4 staff. Asking price 1.4 million, which is 1.7 times multiple on the cash flow. Revenue 2.8, and this person wants to retire. And they're not too bad, 29% cash flow as a percentage of revenue. Now, I don't know what the net profit was and what depreciation was and all the rest of it, but apparently this business was generating 840,000 rands worth of cash. So just thinking about that reality, we've got, as I said, 5 people in this business. The owner or the majority shareholder manager is probably earning a half decent salary. He's getting a bit of cash at the end of the year when he tidies up the books, maybe taking home, I don't know, 500, 600, 700,000, maybe even $1 million if he's not paying the other staff very much and his costs are very low. Another business, 40 years, 22 strong workforce, not that much bigger workforce, but really focused on management hierarchy, systems, equipment, having highly skilled individuals on the workforce who deliver really good quality. Managed to build a business that their asking price is 32 million off a revenue of 32 million, which is pretty impressive, but it's also very profitable, 33%. Now they've got a multiple of 3 times. So that's one of the key aspects of valuing a business. The more systemized it is, the more someone else can take that thing and run with it and add their skill and ability and grow it, the higher the multiple is likely to be. If there is very little you can take over other than the client book and some equipment and whatever else, then your multiple gets lower. And that's where you make money from a business. You don't make money from what you earned, you make money from when you sell it. So that's why it's so critical to decide, am I building this business to earn a salary, or am I building this business to have an asset that I can sell down the line? And it comes down to systems. Who are the trained people in the organization who continue to run it? Is it documented, et cetera, et cetera. So what that looks like in reality, when you come to retirement, and funnily, both of these people were selling the business to retire, is example 1, sale price 1.4, maybe took a salary, dividend, you earn 900,000, $1 million, whatever it might be. Sells the business, his pension is going to be 158,000 rand per year. So this is why it's critical that you make sure you have savings elsewhere when you get to the point when you want to sell your craft business, because you're not going to get the money out of it that's going to support you for any real number of years compared with what you were earning out of the business during the time you were working in it. The other way around is the 32 million. Say you took a salary of $1 million. Most of the companies I do with, actually, they tend to top out at about 2 million, regardless of how big the business is, because they start to understand that they're going to get from dividends. So it's $1 million from dividends. And that's even that's a tiny percentage of what this company is generating each year. But as a highly capital intensive business, they're probably putting quite a lot of money back into machinery, et cetera. So for example, say they take 2 million out. Not unreasonable compared with people I know. Pension wise, that's 3.5 million. So say you took 4 million out every year of this business. They're still comparable in terms of what they're going to get when they sell the business and just put it into an annuity and take a pension. That's a massive, massive difference in terms of what you're used to earning and what you can continue to earn because you've built a business which is an asset of value. So in closing, what game are you playing? What legacy are you going to leave? And that's really what it comes down to. And if you need help, then that's what we do. You can go help yourself. In other words, go and read books, read up, study, watch videos, go on YouTube. There's lots of materials out there to help you understand what to do to take your business to the next level. There's plenty of companies that can help with implementing proper process, systemizing, building a franchise around your business that It is a system that can be transported and sold in different regions, countries, whatever it might be. Some ones I really enjoy: E-Myth Revisited, Scaling Up, Exponential Organizations, all talk to those kind of topics. E-Myth particularly talks about that transition from craft to enterprise. Scaling Up is about how to build a business 10 times. Exponential Organization, same thing. How do you get to the point where it ramps up? And then there's a couple of books that we've written. Traversing the Avalanche is very much more about directorship, if you want to really understand what that means. And Extreme Business Success is about the 3 hats and how does family engage with the business? What are the responsibilities of making sure that you're continuously learning, etc., etc. And the last piece is, if you want to find out more, then we're running regular workshops. I'll send Claire and Simon the details. You can contact me on my cell phone. And we've got one coming up at the end of this month and another one in August. So yeah, drop me a line if you're interested. Yeah, so I did a Fresh Project special. I forgot about that. So if anybody interested, for 2,500 rand, we'll do the workshop and a copy of a book. Any questions? Last questions. Claire, have we got any last questions on the list?
Actually, one just quickly come in. Let me just have a look, see. Why are engineering firms more valuable than architectural firms?
Probably because you have more assets in an engineering firm. If it's purely consulting, maybe different. But in engineering firms that are actually making things, there's usually more of an asset base. I don't know. It was interesting that stat you sent me, Simon, that such a high percentage of architectural firms don't really manage to sell for much.
I think potentially another factor, although it wouldn't be a massive one, but is that engineers are process-driven mindsets. So they tend to, from my experience, have a lot more of those processes in place than whereas architects are more creative and less interested in putting in those sort of systems, I think.
Yeah, I mean, good point. I'm on the board of one company that makes wiring looms and other stuff. So it's a manufacturing business, but that's driven from the founder, and now his son is so super focused on data and systems. And if you want to get a report, he'll give you a report this big. And you go, well, sorry, can you shrink it down? Can you summarize it a bit? That's just too much for me to absorb. There's no lack of data on anything to do with that process. Down to, I mean, they measure things down to the second and the cent in terms of their manufacturing process. So I guess that's part of it. It's the way engineers' brains work is much more process driven, much more detail driven, much more data driven generally.
I agree. And then just a last question. With the economic climate, are you expecting to see more businesses shrink back into a craft model? Is that a trend that we can expect, or the business owners should be looking at? And what would this transition look like?
I think they're going to move back to less employees, but I don't think, if you've got the mindset of an enterprise, then it's what are you going to do when things start to pick up again? So that comes back to that original thing. Are you going to keep the leadership team who think strategically, or if you've got some people that are technicians, that particular piece of the puzzle is not needed anymore, I can find another one of those quite easily. So it's, am I thinking about how I build this as a team concept? So who are my most valuable team members? Or am I thinking about it in terms of who are my most valuable technicians? And it's just a different approach to the same question. Is I need to shrink, what am I going to do first? So we've typically tried to hold on to the leaders in the organization who are running the different divisions, because as soon as we lose one of those, then we lose a whole division. So rather I trim down on some of the technical people, or outsource some stuff to try and shrink costs, or close down my office or whatever, but or all of us as a leadership team will take a salary cut because we want to maintain that team. We'll do everything we possibly can to keep that team. And it might be the case if you've got 2 or 3 key people that are as resources in the craft kind of concept, or it may be very different. It just comes down to who are you trying to hold on to? You're trying to hold on the broad skills that will run the business, or you're trying to hold on to the technical skills that will maybe deliver to the clients better. Enterprises, I can get the technical skills in at least some level. In fact, I may be able to get them more cheaply than I ever were before because there's a whole bunch of them out in the market now. Whereas I need to hold on to my leaders. I need to hold on to my really good managers because they're really difficult to get.
I think we can, from our data, we can back that up quite, because I mean, as Fresh Projects, we've got a very good cross-sectional view across our industry. We're into a very statistically significant number of the practices. And yes, we have seen them shrinking, like you say, because of the downturn in South Africa. Ironically, in the UK, no, ironically, gladly in the UK, we've seen the opposite. Practices are exploding. But we've seen exactly what you said, Tim, is that shrinkage is generally the key process-driven people who are staying, and then the numbers are being reduced in, I guess, the less skilled or less important, if you want to call them that, staff members.
Yeah, so then it's going to be down to the specific circumstances, obviously.
All right, I think we've got one last one. Do you have any data on who will typically buy an architectural firm?
No. I've never worked with an architectural firm. I suppose because so few of them have boards of directors. I don't know, but no, I looked and I couldn't find any specific examples in our client base, past, present, or future. We have worked with manufacturing, engineering, building consulting, those kind of companies, but I don't have an example of an architect.
So sorry, from my point of view, what I've seen over the years, and it's few and far between, but it's generally where a specific niche practice has been acquired by a bigger practice. So if you're very good at tall buildings, or you're very good at, I don't know, something that's that big business wants, then that's where the acquisition would happen typically.
That makes sense. Yeah, because someone's building a portfolio of different specific architectural skills, so they'll go for the best in that one and the best in that one. Who's the best at bridges? Who's the best at tall buildings? Who's the best at whatever it might be? Yeah. Great. Any other questions? We said we'd finish in an hour. Well, after questions. So. No.
I think we're all done.
I think just if I can add one last thing from rewinding back a couple of steps, Tim, to where you were talking about the options for craft businesses is really, if you want to create that wealth, it's about charging more and doing more hours, or charging more per hour. But just specifically in the South African context, where a lot of our projects are fee scale based, maybe some people are just thinking like, I can't charge more. People are telling me what my fee is. But I think the way of getting around that and thinking about that is, yes, it might be a fee scale based fee, but then you've got to understand what is your cost involved with that fee and what is your margin on that fixed fee. And if you can't do that job for a reasonable margin, then you shouldn't be doing that job, which is kind of the same attitude, but just on a fixed fee basis. And that's obviously where Fresh Projects comes in, is we allow you to be able to create your project budgets quickly and work out, is your margin actually going to be profitable in a job, and should you be doing that job or not? And I think that's very critical, as you said, for this whole discussion, as are we going to get value out of your business? Yes, if you are very profitable, that's the way you need to be focusing.
Yeah, and that's that 80-20 rule is, do we really understand what the profit margin is on a particular job? Let's focus on the ones that generate the most margin. And do we understand why we manage to generate the most margin on those particular jobs? What is it that client's buying from us that we may not necessarily be developing as much as we could, or marketing as much as we could? All of those kind of things. So what is our niche? What is our speciality? Where do we shine? Where are we leaders in the organization? Those kind of things you can do to try and get more of the high value jobs. Otherwise, you end up chasing the rats and mice, and that is really difficult to maintain long time, because you just don't have any fat to keep you above water. So then, cooperation might be a good option. They say that empires are built during times like these, and that's because businesses come together and work together and focus on their individual specializations to build a better whole, which comes down to your original story, which was exactly what those guys have been doing.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Tim. I see we've got one last poll. Shall we do that?
One last poll, yes. So I think everyone's done it. There's one or two people haven't. So it was really just it's all very well spending an hour with us talking about stuff, but what are you actually going to do with this? Has it been of benefit? Are you going to deliberately make a move? Are you going to take a T-junction choice? And that's really the idea of the poll. So we have, I'm not sure that's a good or a bad thing. No one wants to focus on being a better craft. You can make lots of money being a craft. Just a bit stressful if you want to go on holiday. So thank you, everyone. I'll end that poll. What do we have? Share the results. There we go. Do some training. Okay, well, happy to, my cell phone's at the top. If you want to drop me an email, I'm trying to get that to work. There we go. Drop me an email if you want to find out more about any training programs. I think we'll probably run this webinar again. So if you've got other people you know in the industry, or any industry actually, that would benefit, then please look out for the next flyer and the next date.
I think Tim will send out that kind offer to everybody after this, along with all these details, so the guys can get hold of you.
So that one-day workshop is taking what we've talked about and just expanding it. So it's 4 sections, 1.5 hours on going through the 3 hats again, and an hour and a half on, well, how do you build the team? How do you build the board? What's that all about? Then we talk about board process, and then we talk about the strategy piece. So if you really want to understand better about what an enterprise looks like, then it's a really good way of giving you the foundational understanding.
And it's focused, and it's one-on-one, right? Or is it it's a group?
An online group.
Okay.
We don't have more than 20 on the group. It's a Zoom call because of COVID. Otherwise, it would normally be a workshop in the room. So there's a few worked examples. We try to make it as interactive as possible so people can share their experiences and learn from each other. Yeah. It's not a lecture. It's a workshop.
Yeah, but obviously with a mix of companies.
Yes.
Online. Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think that's it. As I started off, maybe I'll just wrap up then. So Tim, thanks very much for joining us here today and imparting your wisdom with us. I certainly learned a lot personally, even for our own journey as Fresh Projects. And I'm sure, judging, it has dropped off now because I think we're a bit over time, but judging from the number of people who stayed on, it was 100% record. So obviously we were talking about something that wasn't boring. So thank you very much. And everyone, thanks for joining us today, and good luck with growing your journey.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Pity I couldn't meet you face to face, but I hope what we shared was useful.